Guys, welcome to HiFi Chats number 8. Today we have Lee Scoggins, who is president at Next Screen LLC, who basically owns HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. Hey Lee, how are you?
I'm fine, Alan. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us today. Give me just a second to kind of get through a little housekeeping with folks, and then we'll get right into to finding out about you, okay?
Okay.
So I asked you guys, if you will, out there, please to like and subscribe. All that's on your screen there. Also, some of the music that's been mentioned during all of these HiFi chats will be, we'll have playlists that you can link up to that'll come up on your screen. Also, if you don't mind, if you go to hifibuys.com, there's a newsletter there where you can sign up so that you can see what we're doing not only now, but also in the future. And shall we say, it'll keep you up to date with what's going on. And there's actually quite a bit going on. I wanted to mention to everybody, we are actually now open as of this past Monday. We are now open from Monday through Saturday, 11 to 4. We're manning the phones from 9 in the morning till 7 p.m. during those same times. I am thankful that my entire staff is with me, not actually with me, but some at home and some with me. So anyway, I'm very thankful for that. Also want to say thanks to the frontline folks out there. I'm sure we all know someone who has been working, whether it be in the trucks, restaurants, hospitals, those kind of things. I've got a customer right now that's actually been involved as well. And anyway, I just a big heartfelt thanks to all of you for all that you do to keep us all safe and healthy. Also, next week, we're going to flip this thing upside down a little bit. My general manager is actually going to interview me. So hopefully we can get 15 minutes worth of interesting conversation. And last week we had Richard Vandersteen of Vandersteen Audio here, who was absolutely amazing, as always. Very interesting guy. Also, all the HiFi chats, this one and the 7 previously, are up on the HiFi Buys channel on YouTube. So anyway, if you don't mind just tuning in, if you want to go back and see them, there's a lot of good information about the people and the products themselves. So that said, Lee, you ready to go?
Yes, Alan. Can you see me okay? My videos.
I think you went static, sir. Can you hear me? Technology. All right, you guys hang in there just a second. We will get him back. One of those moments. Lee, let me know when you can hear me. Or maybe you can't tell me because I can't see him. So anyway, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to learn about Lee from a personal basis. And then we're going to kind of get in to some of his hobbies, life experiences, how he got into the business, that kind of thing. I think Lee's going to have to reconnect, and I think that's the way we'll get him back on. Also, who his mentors in business and life have been. Also, his history of getting to Taz and Next Screen. And, Next Screen actually owns some automobile, I think, magazines and that kind of thing as well. So it was a really nice fit. And also about Lee's kind of transformation from, what was a really good job to joining us in our industry and why he did that. Then we're going to find out about some of the old folklore about reviewers, and products, and kind of, if I give you a good review, will you get the product for free or something along that lines? None of that ever made sense to me. So we're going to get to the bottom of that as well. Hey, Lee.
Hey, I apologize. I don't know what happened, but the computer shut down, seemed to overheat and shut down. I don't know what's going on because I've got the latest and greatest MacBook, so it should be okay.
Okay. I know you keep up with that stuff. You are a technology guy.
Oh, I know. And I just bought the latest and greatest MacBook. So it's just sort of a weird thing.
Okay. Mine actually overheated the other day for the first time. I had that little circle with a line through it, and I didn't know what it meant. So I was like, oh my gosh, my hard drive crashed again. But actually let it cool down and it was all good. So, all right, let's get going. Okay. So getting to know you, tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, we're originally from Georgia. My parents were in the medical field, and my grandfather on my mom's side ran the local country pharmacy, the Rexall drug franchise, and my grandfather on my dad's side was the local country doctor, and sometimes help indigent patients in exchange for fruits and vegetables. And I've got my parents divorced and both remarried, and between full brothers and half brothers. I've got 5 other brothers. So it's a lot of boys in my
Wow.
family. And fortunately for my mom, they've had a lot of girls. So it all balanced out in the long run. But my dad was a doctor in Florida. And so I sort of spent time in both Georgia and Florida. And I love both places. I grew up for junior high and high school and part of college effectively in Longboat Key, Florida, which is between Bradenton and Sarasota.
Okay.
On the really amazing Gulf Coast beaches. So that was a lot of fun. And then I went to elementary school in Atlanta, and it's been great. But I'm a Southern boy through and through.
Well, I actually was born in Morristown, New Jersey, but
Oh, wow.
I was moved out when I was 3. I don't think I had a say in it. And if I did, I couldn't express it. All right. So you told us a little bit about where you're growing up. Tell us a little bit about your hobbies and that kind of thing. I know those that are familiar with you know that you have quite a few hobbies. So tell us about them.
Yeah, and none of them seem to be cheap, unfortunately, for me. But I've recently gotten I grew up with sports cars in high school and college quite heavily, but I sort of had a series of boring cars, and I can't explain why I did that. But about a year ago, I bought a Porsche Cayman S, and I've sort of deeply gotten immersed in the local Porsche culture, which is very strong here in Atlanta. And one of my COVID stress beating exercises was to go with some of these guys and their, with their fellow Porsches, and we go up to the North Georgia mountains and go up around Sutchess and Dahlonega, and just have a lot of fun carving up those mountains. So, and we continue to do that. We've even got a group on Facebook for that. And then as a result of that as well, I've been sort of an avid car detailer for a while. So I've gone the full sort of ceramic route. I'm pretty handy with a polisher. And I think that's mostly a result of all these cars being so electronic. If you really want to do something with your car now, if you don't have a computer degree, it's hard to actually do engine work.
Yep. So detailing is kind of like adjusting the carburetor.
Yeah, exactly. So that's been a lot of fun, and I've helped some of the my fellow car buddies, get their cars cleaned up pretty nice, gotten the swirls out of the hoods and fenders. So that's been a lot of fun. And then of course I've been deeply into audio even before I even knew about this current role that I'm in at Next Screen, and before I even started reviewing products, I was throwing around some fairly strong opinions on the hardware section of the Steve Hoffman forum going back to the late 90s. Yep. And I just got more and more immersed in it. And I just love good sound. My dad was an audiophile, and I got it honest from him.
Well, I remember I told you that I found a picture of you from a ways back, and I haven't been able to get that to you, and I apologize to you, but it's actually probably from, I'm going to guess, probably 18 years ago when you were at the store for one of our events.
Oh, terrific. I'm betting I was a little skinnier back then. I might want to see that photo. Give me something to shoot for.
I was going to say I might have had a little more hair back then, but I haven't had mine trimmed up in a while. So getting ready to go after that here soon. I know you've also been, listen, you've been a customer of mine for, quite a while. And I've always enjoyed you coming in and appreciate the support that you've shown us. And I know that you've been kind of an avid SACD collector and record collector as well.
Yeah, I've kind of gone off the deep end. I've got about 5,200 CDs right now. I'd say about 1,400 roughly of those are SACDs. Wow. They're about 700 DVD audios mixed in there. And I like good digital when it's done right. Digital can actually sound really good. But back around 2004, I think I bought my VPI Scoutmaster from you, Alan, and I guess that might have been the old store if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, it was.
And that thing's been a workhorse for me, and I just deeply got into albums. I had some of y'all might know Steve Guttenberg, the audiophiliac. He's been a longtime friend of mine going back to about '89, and he was pushing me to get into records, from like 1989. And I sort of just ignored him for a good portion of time, but I wish I had listened to his advice. He's a very knowledgeable, experienced guy. And once you hear a good record, it's like, there's no going back. And so I've been collecting all these, Music Matters and Analog Productions and Mobile Fidelity reissues. I've hunted down some original pressings that are really good sounding as well. And I have to give a little bit of credit to Tom Caselli for that. Another, customer of yours that has sort of educated me a little bit on finding good records. So, but
he's a knowledgeable guy, that's for sure.
he is his nickname's Tommy Tunes on the Steve Hoffman board, and he really knows his records. I'll tell you that. He knows a fair bit about hardware as well, but that's helped me build up a pretty nice collection here. I bought some stuff from your store over the years, and in terms of records as well. And we're just getting really good, analog here at home.
Yep. So Lee, behind me, that store opened in 1995.
Yeah.
Did you ever go in there?
I believe I did, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because that was my first 18 months or whatever, and then we moved out of there and went across just to kind of to the next building.
Yep. I think I did make a trip or two, actually.
Awesome.
I didn't have any money back then, so I'm not sure if I could have afforded anything, but I did make a trip over there.
Awesome. Well, listen, tell us a little bit about your life experiences, things that have had an impact on who you are.
Well, that's a tough question. Let's see. Life experiences. Well, I think
I know you mentioned Chesky earlier.
Yeah. So, one of the sort of foundational things that I did to become an audiophile was I had lived in Philadelphia briefly before moving to New York to take a job on Wall Street, and I had bought a humble system. It was the Atcom amp and preamp. It was the Nelson Pass designed stuff. Actually, it was actually fairly good sounding for the dollar. I had some Polk speakers that I was a little less happy with because the tweeters kept blowing up, even though I wasn't playing it loud. But that's a whole other story. But I wound up getting to New York. I worked my butt off on Wall Street and had my first good bonus. And I actually went to Lyric HiFi when the famous Mike Kay was still there, and he gave me an introduction of audio research electronics with Magnapan speakers, the 3As. I wound up buying the 3As, didn't quite have enough money for the audio research stuff, but I wound up kind of falling in love with the Magnapan sound, and eventually I fell in love with audio research electronics and was able to buy some of that as I started to make more money. But what the real interesting story, though, I tell you is, so I used to shop at Sound by Singer, and back then Steve Guttenberg, he had like 3 jobs. He was a movie projectionist, he was an assistant producer for Chesky Records, and he was one of the top sales guys for Andy Singer. And Steve became my sales guy. I bought a lot of Chesky CDs, and he noticed that, and he said, Lee, David Chesky's coming in to play his New York Chirinos album, and we're bringing in a baby grand piano to put in the front of the store, and we're going to set up chairs. I'd like you to come to that. Would you like to meet David Chesky? I'm like, yes, that'd be great. Because the Chesky CDs in the early 90s sounded so much better than other CDs. So what I did was I showed up for that. I wound up meeting David, got along very well with David. David's a very nice guy, very easy to get along with anyway, but we hit it off a little bit. And David said, hey, why don't you come by the Village Gate? We're going to record Clark Terry. Now, Clark Terry used to play trumpet on The Tonight Show during the Johnny Carson years. But what a lot of people don't know is he is literally one of the guys that taught Miles Davis how to play trumpet. So he's one of these classic old school jazz trumpet players. Sadly, he's gone at this point, but we were doing a record for him, had an all-star lineup, and I wound up getting, David put me on the list. I was living in New York, not making much money. I didn't have enough to even pay a cover charge at a jazz club. They were expensive even back then. So I was excited about being on the list and not having to pay a cover charge for a change. So I go in there, and funny enough, they had a production assistant that they would pay, kind of peanuts, minimum wage to come in and move cables around and stuff. Well, this was an NYU film and music school student. Turns out he got wasted and just couldn't make it in. He was just trashed. And so David asked me if I could help out, and I said, sure. And I wound up laying cables, and Bob Katz was the recording engineer. Jeremy Kipnis was the sort of assistant record engineer, and Steve Guttenberg was there as an assistant producer and working with David to make some sound judgments about the sound Bob was getting, and sort of the 3 of them it was always a collaborative effort, which was really cool. And it wound up going well, and they invited me to the next session, and that just kept going. And it worked well for me, because even though I was working long hours on Wall Street, they would cut the records largely in the middle of the night. Jazz musicians did not show up till like 12, 1 or 2 in the afternoon, sometimes even later. And they like to work deep into the night because that's their night club schedule. And so I wound up sort of becoming a production assistant for Chesky Records. And that kind of got me embedded into the audio culture. And it was kind of neat because by the time 96 had rolled around, Chesky was doing some of the first high-res digital recordings in the DVD audio format, which funny enough, they called the Super Audio CD. This is before actual DSD was invented. So I kind of, anyway, and I wound up doing this also in Atlanta with Nick Arroyo and Denny Meeker when we were doing high-res recordings of the Atlanta Symphony musicians moonlighting. So I have a pretty long history. I've probably done about 200 professional recordings, I figure, at this point. So it's just a great way to understand how records are made, how microphone placement is so important, how mastering works. All that stuff has kind of contributed to my enjoyment of the audio hobby.
I've always told everybody that if we knew how many hundreds of thousands of people had to be involved to actually get us one great recording, because when you think about it, you got to, make the instruments, you got to have the building, you got to have, the microphones, you got to have the people that understand what's going on. And that's just, we hadn't even gotten anything played yet.
Yeah, it's really amazing. The other thing that I learned in doing that I think a lot of people may or may not recognize is when you record a jazz album, the best jazz musicians, they're all in the studio together. So we would have a handful of mics, but they all play off and improvise by looking at each other. And there's a vibe and an atmosphere you try and create if you're a producer to try and make everybody as relaxed as possible, but keep them on track to produce something great. And that's why when you listen to some jazz records, there's an intimacy and a spontaneity that just naturally occurs when those conditions are right. Sometimes it's tough to create those conditions, but the Cheskys were really good, at doing that. David and Norman do a great job with that. Steve's like the nicest guy in the world. So Steve Guttenberg, everybody, Jeremy, Bobcats, they're all just very nice people. It's a very relaxed environment.
Nice culture.
Having those few microphones led to some really wonderful recordings. It wasn't quite live to 2-track. It was maybe live to 4-track or 6-track or 8-track, but very minimal processing, very minimal editing, full dynamic range involved. It wound up creating some really classic records. If people like McCoy Tyner, the New York Reunion album is the album that I always point them to. But I say that because a lot of modern recordings today sound a little disjointed because the musicians will come into the studio and lay down tracks at different times, and you lose something there. Now that's sort of a jazz lover's bias, but that's what I learned in doing those sessions.
Well, that's okay. I think one of the things you mentioned is, we talk about kind of not mucking with the sound so much in a stereo when we play it back. And you're kind of saying that from the opposite end, that, we shouldn't manipulate the music too much after we make it. We should set it up properly so that we get it good without a lot of manipulation. And I think that's true in the recording as well as in the playback. So great points. Thank you for sharing that with us. Sure. That's an awful lot of nice experiences that I know you get to carry with you. And I think one of the nice things about going and seeing live music, which I'm missing to death right now, is, having that experience and being able to kind of transfer that into the home. And so anyway, I really do miss that. Normally at this point, I kind of ask people, a little bit about how you got in the business, but we're going to hold off for that for just a minute. Okay. And I wanted to ask you, what was your first time going, wow? That moment that all of us have where we kind of like just, oh my gosh, music, it's for me. When was that for you?
I've had 2 really big wow experiences. I think one of the big wow experiences is, my unfortunately recently departed friend, Jeremy Kipnis, he did a high-res recording of some sound effects for Chesky has a movie sort of production music thing where they actually offer sound effects for movie production. He recorded the first 2496. This is going to sound silly, I know. I'll give you a better example in a minute. Where he recorded someone popping off the top of a beer bottle and drinking it, and he did that in high res. And Jeremy was an expert at microphone placement. And it was so realistic. I'd never heard anything that natural sounding. It's sort of weird to point to a special effect. And that was so that made a big impression because that was my first real experience with high-res digital and how good high-res digital could be over 1644. And the second example I'd point to is I had an opportunity to go out to Provo and do an interview with Dave Wilson and listen to the Wilson Wham Chronasonics that he had built for himself and Cheryl. In fact, their names on each speaker. And one speaker's got Dave's name on it, and the other's got Cheryl, his wife's.
Yep,
on it.
I've been there.
And that is just the most amazing listening experience. That's the most natural example of reproduced music. It's in this ginormous living room at their house in Provo, and you know what I'm talking about. It's just the quality of sound from that demo kind of rearranged my thinking in terms of what could be possible with reproducing a recording. So I think that would be another one. But they've been great moments. I think I have to admit there've been a couple of times where I've been both at your old store and the new store, and I've listened to the Vandersteen System 7s and just been absolutely blown away by the quality. Richard actually had, I know he's recently been on one of these chats, and his little pinky knows more about audio than I'll ever know. But he had a setup that before the LA show kind of blew up, 4 or 5 years ago, we were at the LA show and we did an after hours listening thing with people in the industry. And he had that, there was something about the dimensions of that room in the LA, I think it was a Sheraton Hotel or something like that. And it just, the holographic realism of the System 9, he was using all 2-box audio research. So it was like, I think it was like Ref 10 line stage, Ref 10 phono. He had a bassist transcendence turntable, which there weren't many of at that time.
Right.
It was totally over the top, Pagani level electronics. And it was so realistic. I mean, these were grizzled industry veterans, been in the business for decades. And we all just kind of sat there and looked at each other like, holy cow, that's really a fine setup. And
when everybody in the room is kind of having that same kind of feeling, it's one of the reasons I'm so proud to have Vandersteen and Wilson here. I just, I think, the two lines are just really killing it. And both of them from slightly different perspectives, which is what I really like. And I think they both are very, very credible companies. So
yeah, I would agree. So I probably gave you more examples than you asked for, but those are some high points.
Okay.
Some
they
of
were
my
interesting
audio
examples. Thank you for that. One of the things that Richard and I talked about last week is when we have those experiences, those very special experiences, and it's happening to me right now. You can go back and think about them and actually still get the chills on your arms.
Yeah, that's a great enjoyment of a good hi-fi, and it's kind of sad, Alan, because I don't know that, and we could talk about this later. The industry can do some things to better market that type of experience exists. If you go buy a Porsche GT3 or RS and you take, which is basically a street legal race car, and you take it around road Atlanta, you get those goosebumps. You get that, you feel those G-forces when you got to slam on the brakes to make a 90-degree turn left and 10A and 10B at road Atlanta. That's an exhilaration, adrenaline building effect. But we can get something like that at home in front of our stereo system. And people aren't aware of that, but it's mostly because they haven't had that experience. So publications like HiFi Plus and Absolute Sound and others, if we could do a better job of communicating that is what's possible, I think the industry will grow, the pie will get bigger, and people will get more enjoyment out of their system.
Well, I've always tried to express, and this is kind of, you and I have had some of these discussions back and forth that, you can explain to somebody what's out there, but until they actually sit in front of it and have an experience, it's very difficult to translate that. Okay. And that's one of the things why I always think it's important. And we're going to get to shows and stores and that kind of thing. But I guess one of the things, and you can agree or disagree, but I think one of the things that's important is to be able to have a place that people can go to that they know is professionally set up. A lot of times the hotel rooms are a little bit difficult at the shows just because it's not an environment that you have a lot of time to work in. And you end up finding with the stores, we have a lot of time to work in it and really be able to get these things to another place. And that's one of the things that that's part of the reason HiFi Buy's tagline is get the experience.
Yeah, I think I agree with that violently 100%, because I think the dealer is an essential part of getting that experience. There's just nothing that's going to be a substitute for someone going down to their local hi-fi dealer who's knowledgeable, has good brands, knows how to set up the equipment, has, relatively good quality acoustic rooms, from an acoustic standpoint, the rooms are relatively good quality, and they can put together a sort of knock your socks off experience that shows people what's possible. And so that's why, you and I have talked about some things where we've got some a product coming up in the works that we'll talk about later on in time. But the Absolute Sound has made a strategic decision to support the hi-fi dealer. We think that that's something that we can actually play a role in, and we haven't done to the extent maybe we should have in the past. And the way we look at it from a strategy standpoint, and that's what I used to do. I was a strategy consultant with McKinsey. There's sort of an ecosystem that exists around someone who's a consumer. And we always want to put ourselves in the shoes of that customer. How do we make their experience? The dealer is probably the most key part of that, but there's also trade shows you can go to, so you get more familiarity with equipment. And let's be honest, Wilson sets up their trade show rooms, and their dealers know how to do it. There's a defined setup procedure there that's followed to the T. And those rooms almost always sound good, even though they're in a hotel room. But they still won't be quite what you could get at your dealer. There's music streaming services, and then there are record stores where you go to buy your music. What role can the Absolute Sound and HiFi Plus, and the parent company is Next Screen, that's who I work for. There's a role for us to play in each of those different parts of the ecosystem. So that's kind of how we think of it from a business strategy. But we've done some stuff with trade shows. We certainly have worked with manufacturers, and there's the whole thing about the advertising process and how we do reviews. So we're pretty solid on that. We have really good publications, but there's more we can do for the dealer. And if you just stay tuned, you'll see something soon that will introduce people to a lot of stereo dealers.
Awesome. Love that. So tell us a little bit about a particular piece of music that moves you, and why, and how did you find it?
I think it's sort of an obscure thing, but my dad was a huge Van Morrison fan, and I sort of got that from him. I really like Van Morrison. I studied British poets in high school, and maybe that's a key influence on Van himself. Okay. But my dad, around 1980, I started becoming more aware. My dad was deeply into audio. I think he had Bose 901 speakers, believe it or not, and phase linear electronics. And he would play this album that came out in 1980 called Common One by Van Morrison. And there's a track on that that's a very long track. It's got great musicians on it, like Pee Wee Ellis. It's called Summertime in England. And it's just a beautiful track. You got to have to be deeply into Van Morrison to kind of get where he's coming from. But it's sort of a hidden masterpiece of the Van Morrison catalog. And that really moved me, because Van Morrison references British poets. I was in school at the time. I think I was 16.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I was studying British poets at this prep school in Boca Raton. And it just sort of tied in a bunch of things. And I thought, wow, this is really, it really moved me. This was really good. And it got to be where when I was going through downtimes, I would put this record on. And even though it's kind of a somber record, it would cheer me up. So I guess that's my best example. That's the one Van Morrison record I recommend, because everybody always says Moondance or Astral Weeks, and those are amazing albums too. But I always like to here's something even more obscure that's just as good. So
Van Morrison, great artist, no doubt about it. I know I've spent my time with him. So
yeah.
We're gonna basically one more question, and then we're going to take just a tiny little break for some house cleaning, and then we're going to get into some a little more of the business kind of thing. So who is or are your mentors in this business life?
Oh, that's a good question. So there's several. I touch base with Steve Guttenberg and David Chesky. They're just longtime friends. They're way more experienced in this, and they have a different perspective. David's a musician. Steve's an audio expert on all sorts of subjects, and he's almost never wrong. If he recommends something and I buy it, it almost always is the right thing to buy. I'd say in the business itself, I think I look up to people like Peter McGrath and Bill Pugh there at Wilson.
Yep.
I'm a huge fan of Daryl Wilson. I've got to know him pretty well. Sort of on the competitor side, I admire what Alone Wolf has actually done at Magico as well. So I guess those would be some of the top people. I think on the recording side, I listen a lot to things and projects that Bob Katz is working on, simply because I've known him for a while, and he's a wonderful person.
Well, it's great when you have a connection to it.
Yeah, and I have that sort of pro audio world connection. I like Josh over at Rupert Neve. He sort of straddles both the pro side and the consumer side, and does both extremely well. So there are a number of folks I look up to. I think Dan D'Agostino is a very interesting person.
Yep.
I talk probably not enough. I should be talking more to Dave Gordon at Audio Research, and I keep in touch with Josh Dillinger and David Macchioni, who help out on the social and business side at the World of Macintosh Townhome, which is pretty interesting. So there are I got a number of connections. It's a pretty friendly industry. There's a little bit of politics here and there, but I find that it's a nice little community. A lot of these medium and smaller hi-fi companies are owner operator type companies,
Yep.
and people have worked their whole lives and 20 or 30 years to build something. There's some really amazing people in there, like Dan Wright from Mod Wright's a very cool person. I'm a big fan of Nick Doshi. I listen to Nick for reel-to-reel tape machine advice. Nick Doshi's amazing. He's got a new tape pre-out that I don't know if I'll ever be able to afford, but it's the most amazing thing I've heard. At the Florida show, he played a Sinatra tape. And I know this is the dumbest and most boring cliche, but it was like Sinatra was literally in the room. It was on Jeff Joseph Perspective speakers with carbon fiber drivers,
Yep.
And Nick's tube electronics. And, that was another thing where you just say, wow, that's to get that at that level of sound at a show,
Yep.
it is pretty amazing. I pay attention a lot to my good friend Ted Denny at Synergistic Research. He does some really interesting things that involve lowering the noise in a system, and when the noise goes down, you hear more bass, more mids, and more treble, more highs. So it's a three for deal. I don't know. Those are just a couple of names off the top of my head.
I don't know if you've heard, but almost in every single talk that we've had, there's always been noise comes up as an issue, and it's something I've spent an awful lot of time in my last 2 or 3 years here at the store. And in my own systems and in others, just, we don't realize how prevalent noise is and all this stuff.
I would say that we're now beyond the point where having a decent line conditioner is all you need to do, and you plug your components into that line conditioner.
Correct.
You got to have that. That's like fundamental. Those are table stakes, as we'd say in consulting. But when you can work on the grounding and you can move to the better quality line conditioners, I know you're an AudioQuest dealer. They're making some fantastic stuff now. They're power cords, and again, thank you for lending me a couple for a couple weeks there. Those are just fantastic products. I have a Dragonfly Cobalt, so I also like the gadgets that they do with Gordon Rankin, who's another mentor and another sort of living legend in audio. But when you get that noise floor really low, that's one of the best things you can do.
Yep.
It doesn't make sense to go out and buy, Wilson Sabrina speakers or Sasha's or Alexia's or Alex or XVX Chronosonics or what have you, and not get the basics and the foundation set up right. And that means the isolation. It means, like in your case, the HRS stands, things like that have a huge contribution. And one of the frustrating but good things about high-end audio is the more resolving your system gets, the more you hear all those little minute changes that all those tweaky products, some of which maybe don't seem like they should work from a science standpoint, but they really do work. And if you don't have them, you've got extra noise in your system. Once you get all that noise really low, that's what really starts to create that realistic experience of musicians playing in a real space in your own room at
Yep.
home, and then your system becomes a time machine, and that's really wonderful.
Yep.
When you get there, there's no going back, and people can laugh at you for spending 30 whatever $1,000 on a pair of Sashas, but when they come over and hear it, they're like, holy shit, now I get it. I thought you were just crazy, Lee, but this
Yep.
there's something to it, you know.
It's called presence.
Yes, exactly. And hearing that soundstage wide, deep, the instruments are placed very precisely.
Yep.
When they hit the kick drum sounds like a real drum. When the saxophone plays, it has the same timbre of what a live sax. It's
Awesome.
really kind of fun.
Yep.
I'm very passionate about the hobby, as you can tell.
Yes, you and I both. We have no issues that way. So I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping, so bear with me here just a minute. If you folks out there would please like and subscribe, it's there on your screen, and we also will have a HiFi Chats playlist, which basically is the Van Morrison tune here that Lee mentioned, as well as the folks from previous, and we're going to have all that together as a playlist that'll be on I think Tidal and Qobuz. And you also end up finding if you'll go to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter, that'll keep you informed of what's coming up now and also in the future. Also want to let you know we are actually open. We have been open previously, but kind of the showroom closed. I kind of nicknamed it Clopen. We were closed and open at the same time, but you end up finding that we are now from Monday through Saturday open from 11 to 4. We're being very careful. We have masks down here for everybody. I'm actually closed in my office, which is why I'm not wearing one now. And you end up finding that we've got gloves and masks, and we're wiping things down after any person is here or comes, and getting all the doors and that kind of thing as well. So anyway, it's a very safe environment. We're a small store, so we're able to kind of give you the space that you need. We've always kind of done that though. So also want to let everybody know in about 10 days, we will have HiFi Buys e-commerce up and running. We've been working on it since about the end of February. We're very excited about getting that going. We were going to wait till about the end of the year, but decided it was time at the end of February to get this train up and running. So we're all really excited about it, and our whole team has worked diligently on it. Also, next week, we're going to flip this thing upside down, and my general manager, Chris Doty, is going to interview me. So we'll see how that goes. That should be a lot of fun. And last week we had Richard Vanderstein with Vanderstein Audio, always a wonderful guy, an interesting guy to talk to. Also, all these chats are on HiFi Buys YouTube channel, so please go out there and check it out. And finally, but not last, but thanks to the frontline folks. You guys are amazing. We appreciate all you're doing out there. And I just, from the bottom of all our hearts, thank you. So Lee, let's get into this a little bit.
Okay.
So you left a great job to join this industry. Okay.
Yes.
And so tell us about your path to Next Screen and why.
Yeah, so I had started thinking about, and I talked to people in the industry. I was, the way I got started, in some ways, the way I got started, I was a reviewer too. Chris Somavigo, who's a local high quality cable manufacturer that owns Black Cat. He and I were batting around ideas in his home. And we came up with the idea that we would start this headphone blog and have reviews on it. It was called The Headphone Guru, and Headphone Guru is still around. A third partner came in named Frank Iaconin, and Frank took over the business, and he now runs, and that's one of the popular headphone sites. And Frank's a good guy, and he's got some terrific reviewers that produce content. But Chris and I actually came up with that idea and started it. And Chris was kind of always encouraging me to sort of get off the Hoffman board and sort of write real reviews. And he thought I could do that. So I tried my hand at it. I guess I didn't suck too badly. And I did that for a while with Headphone Guru, and then Frank took it over. And then I got to talking to Scott Hall, who runs Part-Time Audiophile, and he offered me a job. And that site gets a little more traffic, and I went over there, and I wrote about 110, maybe 120 different reports, or a combination of show reports or equipment reviews for Scott. And then I worked in data and analytics at McKinsey and Accenture, and I started thinking, I think the industry is really interesting, but I don't think they're applying some of the modern data and analytics techniques to figure out better ways to reach the customer. So I started talking about that, and I wound up becoming friends with Tom Martin, who owns Next Screen. And Tom's a very interesting, very nice man, very smart, but he and I had something in common. We both were associate partners at McKinsey when we left. And so we had that common background, and we learned basically the same way to break down corporate problems and solve them. And I got to talking to Tom about some strategy ideas I had around his business and how we could improve HiFi. At the same time, Tom kind of was trying to talk me into being a reviewer for the Absolute Sound, which I was, absolutely honored about. I've been reading Harry Pearson since like '88. And so I wasn't quite sure that would be the best spot for me. But I said, well, we got to talking and our strategy ideas were kind of gelling. And on one call, I kind of said, it'd really be nice if we could figure out some way where I could come to, instead of work for you part-time for reviewer, certain amount of cash per article pay, to, a full-time job. And I know I'm making good money here at consulting, but would there be an opportunity? And he actually came back with this idea of sort of my being president of the publishing company that oversees both HiFi Plus, our European publication, and the Absolute Sound, the US one, which I think a lot of your customers are probably more familiar with.
And you have other publications that NextScreen does as well.
Yeah. So what's also interesting about this, because now my passion about cars and sports cars, we have sort of a car review and car racing site called Winding Road. And what makes it even more interesting is that Tom has actually built a Mazda Miata MX-5 spec racing series that goes to 20 circuits a year. Some of it's duplicate visits, but 20 circuit stops a year. And it's pretty well established. And it's sort of like one of those circuits you do if you're an up and coming pro driver and you're learning how to do lines, the lines of the curves and hitting the apex properly and everything. So I'm EV of business development for Winding Road. But I will tell you, in my first 6 months or so at NextScreen, I've really been focused on the audio because we've been trying to sort of implement a new strategy. And so we're trying to go after new customer segments, but we're also trying to bring the company into more of a digital age. So it's a little bit of what McKinsey would call a digital transformation. So what we're going to do, and what you'll see soon, is we're modernizing our websites. So if you go to our website now, it maybe looks like something that was designed in 2004, because it was. And we need to have a website that looks like it's 2025, and we will soon have that. You'll have to be patient with us. We're just working on that now. But one of the things that we unveiled about a week and a half ago is a new iPad reader that's a much more modern, very fluid iPad reader. And we've had some technical glitches with a previous version. We did a clean slate a redo, and it works really wonderful. So if you like reading the Absolute Sound, you can get our iPad reader. If you are a customer, there are a lot of US customers that are a reader of HiFi Plus. There you go. And you can go to Pocket Mags, which is a UK, which is sort of the, if you will, the Zinio of the UK, and you can read it on that. And that works really well too. We haven't had as many problems with our UK. So we're modernizing all our digital assets. We're going to be incorporating more video, and we're going to have more modern websites. And so we're going to improve all the digital side of the business. On the print side, we have a very simple philosophy. Our print magazine is excellent. We're not going to mess with what Robert Harley, Neil Gator, and Jonathan Vallon are doing. They just do a really wonderful job. I can probably get up and show you. I don't have it. It's sort of just a few feet beyond where I can touch, but we also have these great books about the history of high-end audio. So you've probably seen them, Alan. There's one on loudspeakers, which is volume 1, and volume 2 is electronics. I did get one for you, Alan, actually for the store. So I'll bring that by in the next day or two.
Well, that's awesome.
But
I'll keep it on display on one of our coffee tables in one of the sound rooms.
I would appreciate that. It's really interesting. I've got an extra copy of the electronics book.
Cool.
I'll give you. I'm sorry I didn't get down there today or yesterday to give it to you for the showing on video. But you can, if you go to our Facebook page, there's a video by Robert Harley introducing it. So we're actually we've actually got a lot. We're pretty excited about the future. We've got a lot of really neat stuff that's going to be happening. There are a couple of new publications we're working on that we'll unveil shortly that we're super excited about. I think it'll bring a lot of value to the customer. And in one case, it's going to bring some value to your local dealer as well.
Good. Good. Because I think tying the dealer to the customer, I mean, what is the best relationship that they can have is with a great dealer. And I just, it's always been my thing. It's why we've always believed in the experience and that kind of thing. And I realize that some people haven't had that great of an experience, and I'm sorry for that, but I don't think it
Yeah, there's a little bit of slick salesmanship, for lack of a better term, at lesser quality dealers. But to get the right hi-fi, let's be honest, a lot of the high-end audio stuff, it can be a little expensive. This is
and
people that are really into it. This is not a small purchase for them. It's not like buying a car or a house. Don't get me wrong. And I do think you get good value for a lot of the products now on the market, but it can be a complex process to put the system together that has the right synergies between the amplifier and the speaker. That you get a good high quality source, that you get a line stage that's very transparent, that you get a power amp that at least has the right amount of. That's something where a dealer has set up systems 50,000 or more times in a row. He's learned along the way from doing that. It's sort of like being a reviewer and hearing a lot of equipment. You do get an advantage because you've heard a lot of stuff, and you kind of learn over time what works and what doesn't work.
Yep.
And you just can't replace the dealer for helping accelerate basically, I think we could sum it up this way. A dealer will help you avoid a lot of the big mistakes, so you get great sound as early as possible. Even if you're on a journey where you get better and better sound, over time, it's like Alan Jones at HiFi buys, he's your turbocharger. He's going to get you there faster. and Alan will keep you from making some really dumb mistakes. And, part of that's going to be the synergy of the components. Part of it's going to be that foundation we talked about with the line conditioners and good cables and grounding and isolation and, things like that, good equipment rack. So you get all that stuff together, you're going to get that sound that you heard in the showroom that knocked your socks off. You're going to have a much higher probability of replicating that in your own house.
So one of the things that I look at in that, and just to kind of comment back to you, and thank you very much for your kind comments towards us and myself as well. One of the things that I find is that, if you get the fundamentals right and a fundamental system, you're going to have really good sound. But what high performance is about is doing 100 to 1,000 little things that create one large difference. The same way you build a high performance car or a high performance anything. It's the difference between just doing the fundamentals and then going beyond. And you have manufacturers now of all walks that are just, technology is really allowing them to go places. And we've seen that without a doubt over the last 10, 15 years. I think about, Lee, 15, 20 years ago, what a turntable costs versus what it costs today for that same sound. It's pretty amazing. And, we've seen that sound lower in cost a bit, but also the high end has gotten higher because that technology is, it costs more to do it.
Yeah. So 2 comments on that. One example may be that Cord Hugo 2 that I was looking at the other day in your store. If I guess it's what, 2,700 roughly.
Yeah, right in that area.
One of the great things is sort of the people I get to talk to by being in the business, but I've gotten to know Robert Watts, the designer of the algorithm that's in that thing, and the number of taps and what that means and how that creates a better conversion process. That Hugo 2 for the money is pretty darn amazing.
We feel the same way about the Cutis from them. I mean, $1,700 or whatever. I mean, both.
That's probably in some ways even better value because they're always building on what they had, and they're always adding more taps and then bringing the price point down. Cord's a very interesting company altogether. But the other thing that I would point to, just my own personal experience, and I was lucky. Peter McGrath, actually, he's down in Florida, so he came up here. It was convenient because he's got family in Atlanta. And he actually set up my Wilson Alexia 2s. And it was sort of like I joked that it was like taking a golf lesson from Tiger Woods or Jack Nicklaus. I mean, if Peter's setting up your speakers, I mean, I'm going to live in this home till I die because I can't move my speakers now. They've been placed by God. I'm joking, but it is kind of, but when we were tuning the bass response of the speaker in the room, every quarter inch mattered. And there was one spot where we moved it if we were a quarter inch ahead or a quarter inch behind it. We did this a couple of times, even though these things they're 278 pounds apiece unboxed, and they were on Wilson sliders, the little pucks.
Mhm.
And when we got to that one spot, the bass locked in on Peter's favorite track, and that was it. It was that quarter inch.
Yep.
If you're a Wilson dealer, you got to know how to find that right quarter inch. And that is something a dealer can do, but not even Lee Scoggins or a serious audiophile is going to easily be able to do quite as right. And that's an example of that dealer experience and setting up multiple Wilson systems where you get to find that magic spot. And that made all the difference in the world. If hopefully you'll be able to come over at some point, Alan, and hear the bass I'm getting in here. It's pretty amazing considering the size of the room.
Well, I can't wait. I look forward to doing that.
It's about placement, speaker placement, I guess was my point.
Yep.
Right? If the dealer it helps you with the speaker placement, you're 90% there, maybe.
Yep. It's amazing how much a quarter inch can do. So
yes.
I totally concur.
And I know that the same holds true for your Vandersteins as well.
Yep. Actually, any speaker. So obviously, as you go up the ladder, there's differences in what you can achieve and that kind of thing. But all speakers take a little time to get in the right place and to figure out what's the right thing to do with them. So Lee, what we're going to do is we're going to concentrate a bit more on Taz, just because it's the American version. Though I will tell you that we see HiFi Plus stuff on social like all the time now, so it's it's kind of melding. So can you tell me a little bit about like the history of Taz?
Yeah, so oh gosh, I probably should be a little better prepared for this, but back in, I guess it was the mid 70s.
Sorry for catching you.
All the rage was, stereo review was popular. It was all about objective measurements.
Yep.
And a lot of serious audiophiles started recognizing the disconnect between things that had really amazing like measurements. And amplifiers, I think we all remember, it was total harmonic distortion. THD statistics ruled the day. Or metrics, I should say, ruled the day. And a lot of the amps just didn't sound good, even though they had low THD. And people started wondering why that was. And then you had J. Gordon Holt, a stereophile, come along, and Harry Pearson of the Absolute Sound come along and say, this isn't the way to do it. It's about subjective listening. And subjective matters as much as these objective measurements. It's not always a lab experiment. I'm simplifying things here, but
yes,
they started these little journals, and they were like this big. They were not big magazines. They were like little journals.
Yep.
And they tended to be thick. And I think back then both magazines were just very instrumental in creating the high-end audio industry. A lot of the early audio research reviews were in these magazines.
Mm-hmm.
I think Magnapan and VPI in particular, back in the early Harry Weisfeld days, and Harry's a great guy. He's still super active on it. They got their start because Harry Pearson wrote a review for them. So we've been around for quite a while, and I guess it was sort of, I don't know when Robert came over. I want to say mid to late 90s, somewhere around there. Our editor, Robert Harley, who's just a really bright person with, precise hearing, golden hearing. He left Stereophile and became the editor of Taz. Maybe he wrote for a while, but Robert is sort of the captain of the ship. And when I came on board, there was sort of a consensus between Tom and I. We're not going to fix what's not broken. Even with COVID, and we can talk about that impact on our business, we continue to put out a really high quality publication that I think all of us are proud of, but Robert just does a really good job. So we've sort of evolved over time. We've had this, the CD era, we've had SACDs, we've had DVD audio, and we've had reel-to-reel tapes making a comeback. We've had advances in circuit designs. Absolute Sound has been there the whole time to sort of cover that. So at a high level, I guess that's kind of how it evolved. I'm sure I'm missing a few key pieces.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good piece of history. I know that I have, I've been in the business, I guess, 37 years, and I know that Taz has been pretty much with me the entire way. So
Yeah, yeah.
I remember,
Back in the days of the Atlanta Audio Society, we had a gala dinner. I think it was the 25th anniversary or something. And Harry Pearson actually came down from Seacliff. He had a friend who was a longtime reviewer, John Coolidge, who I think was a physician here in
yep,
town.
he came by the
And
store.
yeah, and Harry Pierce, we had this. We went to some country club and we had a dinner, and I didn't know Harry at the time. I wound up standing behind him in line, and I knew he was a big Magnapan guy, and I told him that I just bought 1.6s or something. We had a nice conversation about how Magnapan was such a good value, and he was giving me tips on how to set them up and everything. There are a lot of nice little tweaks you can do to Magnapans. I was like, this is pretty cool. I'm at a dinner in the mid 90s or early 90s talking to Harry Pearson, one of the icons of the industry. I had no idea at that time that I'd even find myself working, for his magazine.
Well, it is kind of interesting how this world revolves, no doubt about it. Hey guys, I wanted to let y'all know out there that please, if you got questions for Lee Scoggins, president at Next Screen, which owns HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. So anyway, if you have questions, I know we'll get a little thing up there for you to fill out questions so that we can ask it at the end of this. So we'll do Q&A at the end. So we got a little history on Taz. Now, can you tell me what it is you think that separates Taz from the rest of this busy stuff we got going on out there? How do you guys try to separate yourselves?
I think it really comes down to the quality of our writing. I think we just have very experienced writers, and they do a really good job of breaking down in subjective terms the differences that they're hearing, and they do that very accurately. And it's difficult. You've got to have some experience. You have to have a highly resolving system. But the other thing is, if you go down, one of the great things I was able to do, my first business trip was to go to Albuquerque, New Mexico, where at the base of mountains is Robert Harley's house. And he's built this, I don't know, it's a crazy expensive listening room, but it's sort of built to literally upper end recording studio standards. It's got the vault door and everything.
Well,
And when you watch how Robert works, the precision and the scientific approach he takes to evaluating gear, I think that kind of sets a tone for how the other reviewers kind of evaluate gear. And I think one of the things that we do, one of the questions you had sent me is sort of how do we do a review? Robert likes to do reviews where there's something new and innovative about the product. It may be an established brand, but they're doing something a little different. So it's a little more interesting. It tends to be something that has high performance sound quality. We tend to like products that, if we write a review on something, we want people to be able to go into their dealer and find that brand, or find a dealer in their neighborhood or not too far away where they can actually buy the product. So we'd like to see, a good number of dealers, but there is a little bit of an application process. So people will submit. I can reach out to Robert and I can say, even as president, I can reach out to Robert and I say, hey, I found this new product that's coming over. It's an established brand. Could we do a review on it? Usually his response is, hey, just have the manufacturer tell me these 5 things. And those 5 things are, what's the innovation? What does the product do? Is it a Mark II version? And what's the difference between Mark I and Mark II? So there's a little bit of an application process, and Robert's a very thoughtful guy, and he selects what goes into the magazine.
That's awesome.
Basically, we try and make it as objective as possible. I think a lot of people think that there's some mysterious political process by which things get selected, but it's more about interesting and good sound quality.
We're going to get to that. Thank you. That's it's kind of interesting. I think the innovative part is kind of cool. And I think the idea that they need to have dealers, I think is important as well, because we can all have a product and it can sound great, but someday we have to become a real company.
Yeah, if it's some obscure, I'm sure maybe somebody listening to this could come up with a product we reviewed where there weren't any dealers and it was all mail order only. But that's sort of rare. It's mostly, we're reviewing the Wilsons, the D'Agostinos, the Audio Researches, the Vandersteens of the world, and the Audio Quests and the HRSs. It's that sort of proven, established companies that we really focus on.
Well, that's kind of where we've gone to. So I understand. I like companies with very narrow, what I call narrow-minded tunnel vision that allows them to advance forward in a big way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it kind of sounds like it can't happen, but it really is when you have that tunnel vision, you actually are able to march forward in a big way because
Yeah, you stick to your netting. I'm always skeptical when there's an audio company and they build everything, the speakers, the electronics, and the cables. I kind of think, well, there's no way you can really be good at all three.
Yep. How many reviewers do you have who work for Taz?
I think we're around a dozen right
Okay.
now. I
Okay.
think we're somewhere around 10 or 12 maybe for HiFi Plus as well.
Okay.
We do a wide variety. I'm actually doing a little bit of review duties myself for HiFi Plus. We've had a couple of new writers. I will tell you, I had a high opinion of Taz coming in, but working more closely with the writers and understanding their process, I sort of stand in awe of the quality of writer we have. I know that's sort of a little self-serving because, I'm president of the publishing company, but
Yeah.
I really do believe that we have high quality writing. I'm a terrible liar too. So if I didn't really believe in it, I would be doing a lousy job here on the video.
Well, I've always, my thing is people have always said, hey, you're genuinely passionate, Alan. And I think, it's easy to see that. And I think, if you are, if you are false in any way, people see it quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will give you one example I can point to. So in the midst of the COVID crisis, where some of our ad spend dried up, we had a couple manufacturers approach HiFi Plus, and they were British companies, I think, for the most part, or European.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit of a mix, probably. And they told our publisher, Pete, they said, hey, we're getting slammed here. We've had no sales for 2 months, 3 months. Orders have dropped off. We don't have enough money to advertise. It's crazy. They're like 4 or 5 high-end publications in the UK, by the way. We can't do everybody. So we got together and we started talking about who had the highest quality writing. And we decided it was HiFi Plus. And we've got an editor who I've become friends with, Alan Surcom over there, he's a really funny guy too. His parents were in the comedy business in London. And he's just a great guy and a great editor. But these advertisers have come to us and say, we're going to keep advertising with y'all. And we're not advertising in anybody else. And that made us feel really good because that didn't happen once or twice. It happened several times. Wow. And so that made us feel like we were putting out a really high quality product in HiFi Plus. We actually have a lot of Taz subscribers that subscribe to HiFi Plus because it's different reviews. So it's like reading a different magazine. It's not like, I think maybe there's been some overlap with some of the headphone stuff, but generally speaking, it's a different magazine if you want sort of a European view. And there's some interesting history there. There's this guy named Roy Gregory who started that magazine. And the reason I mentioned him is we've been talking about some of the foundational noise lowering stuff. You could argue that Roy was the first person to adequately describe that process.
Wow.
So anyway, it's kind of interesting to kind of oversee these. They're very different markets when you look at UK and Europe versus the US. But at the end of the day, it's a bunch of music enthusiasts trying to get better sound.
Yep. We're all a bunch of nuts, and I love it.
It's a nerd fest for sure. Yes.
All right. So listen, in the Absolute Sound, you have special sections in it. One of them is called Absolute Analog, and you have some others. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we're trying to, so there are a couple of things going on. We're trying to set up sections that appeal to people's passions. There are people that are really into high-res digital. There are people that are really into analog, and we want to make sure we're addressing those customers' needs. Mm-hmm. But we're also coming out with publications. We've done some headphone guides. We've done a directory of products so people can understand the full panorama, if you will, of what a Wilson Audio or a Magico or a D'Agostino or Audio Research has in their lineup and what price point, so you can get an idea of sort of where your budget fits in terms of what you want to spend. And
that's kind of like the buyer's guides, correct?
Yeah, that's like, we have like a buyer's guide, and that's been real successful for us. We do an Editor's Choice Award. In fact, we just had a very successful 21st anniversary issue of HiFi Plus, but it's...
this is one of the buyer's guides.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for the props. And anyway, anyway, we're trying to make it easier for customers to find the better gear, to put it together more intelligently, and to enjoy it sooner rather than later. And make
That's
sure
great.
they don't miss a step. Make sure they're not using the zip cord for cables. Make sure they've got a decent line conditioner, unless they live at the power plant or whatever. And even then, I'm not sure. We're trying to cover that. The cheap tweaks, like I'll give you an example. I put isoacoustics Araya footers on my VPI table. Big improvement. So there are things like that you can do that cost, more on the order of $100 to $200 to $300, and still get a little bit of boost in your sound. And that's what makes audio fun. You might not be able to buy a new component, but every year or two, when you slowly upgrade your system, that's how I built out a fantastic system. But in between, there are tweaks you can do. You can buy better cable.
Yep.
You can go down to HiFi buys. You can buy that entry, mid, or upper level line conditioner. Niagara product. You can put in better footers. You can go buy the nice equipment. There are things you can do. Well, HRS stands are more like component level pricing, but you get the message. There are things you can do along the way to improve your enjoyment.
And actually,
or you can get off the merry-go-round and just buy music, which is also nice.
Well, they're kind of both. I always tell everybody the easiest way to make your system sound better is a 6-pack or a bottle of wine.
Yeah. Or in my case, a martini.
Yes. Your choice. All right. So listen, you touched on this a little bit, but how do you guys decide what to review? We're going to get into a little bit of folklore here, guys, but we're going to start with this one and get into it a little bit deeper. So
yeah, let's just dispel a big myth, because for a while I bought into this when I was a young and
we all did
naive audiophile that the Wilson guy would show up, or I shouldn't say it to
let's say no brand name.
Make a payoff to somebody, and that's what got you a review in the magazine, that it was some sort of payola. Well, fortunately, it doesn't work that way.
You might have made paella.
Yeah, there is a process where you apply to have your product reviewed, and if you have a good track record, if it's something innovative, if we think this is a better question for Robert Harley. I'm really on thin ice here trying to answer this, because this is a Robert Harley question. But if I had to say, the number one determinant is, do the people reading our magazine, are they going to get some practical use out of having a review on that product?
That's a great way to put it.
And let's dispel another myth. The sales process is disconnected from the review process. We have an editorial team that's over here, and we have a sales team at Taz that's run by Jim Hannon. He's got these great people, Scott and Cheryl, working for him. They're just doing an amazing job, even in difficult COVID times where nobody wants to spend any money on ads. They get great results. But those guys are doing the ads, and there's what they call a Chinese wall between people buying ads from us and whether we decide whether to review their product or not. You really have to have a product that's interesting, that we think the customers are going to be interested in. Are there companies that have a track record of just making blockbuster products, like Audio Research, and Jonathan Vallen's written multiple audio research reviews? Absolutely, because they make great products, and they're in that issue. That reviews in that issue for that reason. But we do try and keep things objective.
And I used to sit and think as well about, take Jonathan, for instance. He constantly gets the audio research product to review. Well, why is that? And, we all have this suspicious thing going on, because that's the way our guy brains think about this stuff. And,
Right.
There's got to be a reason that all this happens all the time. Well, obviously, he's more intimately familiar with what it was and what it is and where it's going than anybody else.
Yeah,
So
it's the
he's
same
going to
way
do a
with
better
Robert
job.
Harley. Why has Robert Harley, I guess, written 2 or 3, probably 3 at this point, because I think they're in Mark 3, reviews of the Berkeley audio deck? Because he was there at the beginning and understood the groundbreaking technology that was in the first one. And it's better to have that continuity. It happens at other magazines, HiFi News and Record Review. You've got Ken Kessler does a lot of the audio research reviews. I like Ken a lot. He's a funny guy too, by the way. And he does a great job, even though he writes for a competitor magazine. But I look forward. He knows the product line really well. Why not leverage that expertise?
Totally agree.
For informed
So,
review.
so in folklore, it said the reviewers are given a product for a great review. Can you debunk this?
Yeah, that's absolutely hogwash. It's total BS. And let me tell you how it works. And I'm going to be very transparent. So
Thank you.
if you're a reviewer, you're considered being in the industry. And you get what's called an accommodation price. If you review something and you really like it, you basically pay roughly what the dealer pays. Yeah, and it varies. It could be 20% off. It could be 50% off. It varies by product and by type of product and specific company. But we don't get anything for free. I think the only exception might be there might be occasionally there are promo copies of LPs and things like that. That may actually get in free, but that's sort of typical for the music review business in general. That may be an exception, but
it's kind of like giving
if
an
a reviewer has a
station.
product in their home and they write for Taz or HiFi Plus, they've paid for that product.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. All right. So another thing, people say you never review a bad product. Tell us why.
That's a great question. And again, I'd probably feel more comfortable if Robert was here next to me telling us. I think historically there's little value in reviewing a bad product. People want to read about stuff that's going to work.
Right.
But occasionally we do actually have a mediocre review. So it's sort of also not true, because there are mediocre reviews that there are products we're less enthusiastic about that we publish. But I think at the end of the day, people don't want to pick up a magazine and have it filled with half bad reviews. I don't think that helps the customer, and it doesn't help the industry.
I would look at it as you should be a champion of good products. And if someone has built something and sent it to you for review, why would you sink them? I mean, that just.
Well, there's that too. Some of these are small companies, and sometimes we'll get in a product that's maybe not, for lack of a better term, fully formed. And so, maybe it's just not ready for prime time.
So you will have a product occasionally that you will have presented and brought in and just not write a review on it.
Yes, I believe that happens.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. So I hope that's good insight for everybody. There certainly are questions that I've had over this time. I've kind of known the answers, but wanted to actually hear it from the man himself. This is Lee Scoggins, president of Next Screen LLC, the owners of HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. I ask y'all, if you will, to like and subscribe there on your screen. Also, we will be putting out HiFi Chats playlist, which is about the music that we talked about with the folks on HiFi Chats. This is HiFi Chats number 8. I ask you to go to hifibuys.com, and if you will subscribe to the newsletter to keep you in touch with what's going on and up in the future. We are also now officially open from Monday through Saturday from 11 to 4. We man the phones pretty much the rest of the time. The hours specifically are 9 to 7. I also want to say thanks to the frontline workers out there. You guys, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much. Also want to let everybody know that HiFi Buys will have an e-commerce site pretty much up and running. We're going to walk before we run to make sure all our processes and that kind of thing are in place, and that we will handle things in the same way we handle things in the store, which is carefully and efficiently. And so anyway, we look forward to having that up as well. Also, next week, we're going to flip this thing upside down a little bit, and my general manager, Mr. Chris Doty, is going to interview me. And last week we had Richard Vandersteen with Vandersteen Audio, which was, shall we say, again, a very interesting concept or conversation, I should say. And so if you will, any of the HiFi Chats are out on HiFi Buys YouTube channel, so you can watch any of them. All of them are on recording. We've had some amazingly interesting guests, people that are real powerhouses in the industry, and appreciate that very much. So, Lee, so how much influence do you believe that Taz has on the sale of a product?
That's a great question. It's actually hard to measure that definitively. This is something we talk about internally. We actually have quite a bit of influence, and I'll tell you why we why we know that. We have what marketing people call attribution. If we write a review, we can see the sales spike on the number of products sold of that particular product we reviewed.
Okay.
Now, some manufacturers will share that with us, others won't, but the print magazines are still, even in 2020, very influential. So if we write a review of, let's say, a cable product, we can measure how well that, we can get feedback from the manufacturer how well that product sells based on that print review. If it's a young company that's less established and we write a review, sometimes we will help be one of the key things that establishes that company. But like you said earlier on, we're trying to share with people the better products that we think will get them to that absolute sound. So we do have manufacturers that are very keen to have regular advertisements with us because they've seen the impact on their own particular sales.
Okay, awesome. Just kind of a comment on that, because you do have so much influence on the sales, something I've always, and one of the magazines did it a while back, and I know I've mentioned this to you, and I guess I'm just going to say it publicly, and that is that I'd love y'all to do reviews of basically dealers and put a couple of pages in there and talk about, the dealers, because if you have that much influence, it would be great of y'all to kind of help people be able to find a place and be more comfortable with it. So anyway,
yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got some things we're working on that are going to help in that respect, Alan, and we will definitely be doing that. The other thing that I would say, we don't just live in a print world. We have influence through our social media channels.
Yep.
But let's be honest, there are if my friend Ed Leonard says, "Hey, I've got this Revox tape machine, and I really like it. I think you should buy one and buy the Mark III." Hearing that from Ed and knowing his experience, his direct experience, that also means a lot to me as a consumer.
Right.
Now, if I go, this is a weird example, but if I go and I find a Revox PR99 Mark III review in a Taz, and I've got that too, that certainly helps as well. Mm-hmm. But we're not naive. We know that there's a variety of reference sources that customers have.
Right.
But we do think that the print magazine and what we have seen are enough sales spikes to know that we're when we review something positively, that product tends to move quite fast off the dealer floor for good reasons, I hope, because if we do the review right and we do hear good sound, there's going to be higher customer satisfaction.
Yep.
And hopefully the dealer's happier with us because we're helping build awareness. And that gets back to a fundamental thing that we believe at Taz, at least on the strategy team, if you will, of me, Tom, and Susan. And that is that this industry could be 10 times the size it is if we had better awareness of what the products could do. It's not as cool a thing now as buying a Porsche or a Hublot watch. HiFi is not quite that cool. If it was, this would be a bigger industry. And I think we do rightfully consider that we have a role to build awareness for high-end audio in general. And we try and do that.
Yep.
But we do that better if we support the dealers, because that's where you get the experience. We do that better if we support the manufacturers by getting their product information and get their sound quality observations out in a legitimate, objective fashion. And we do that for trade shows as well, because we have trade show reports and we cover the Rocky Mountains and the Exponas and the Florida Audio Expos.
The show reports have always been my favorite.
I love the show reports because you go to the show.
Well, they're little blips and you get to rip through the stuff and it's really quite
There's
awesome.
So much stuff. We can't cover everything. And Expona in particular is huge now. We can send 6 writers to Expona and we each focus on a different floor and we still won't get every room and every new product that comes out. We'll get I think we try to get most of the good stuff, but it's just amazing how much happens at a show. It's a whirlwind. And you got people cornering you with conversations in the hallway, which I like, But when I was a reviewer, I was also trying to cover 10 rooms a day for Scott, and now I'm in a more luxurious position where I can, a more relaxed thing where I can roam the halls and have those business discussions.
That's
and
great.
not have the weight of, hey, I've got a deadline. I've got to get 5 show reports to Scott.
Long nights.
So it is a different way of it's a different way to do the shows. But I do think these regional shows are important because while they're no substitute for a dealer, it does build awareness in different parts of the country. And I think that helps the industry in general. The other thing, quite frankly, are the events that dealers have, and they're really important. I'd say 2 of the top events, like when you guys do your guys' night out, that's really fun on a number of levels.
Yep.
But Definitive Audio does a big thing out on the West Coast. Those things, if you talk to people like Wilson, those are game changers. They're effective. They move product. They build awareness for the brand. It's stuff like that really moves the needle and builds the industry up, I think.
Yep, that's awesome. No, gosh, I was hoping to go to the Munich show this year, and I'm just so upset that all of us didn't get to go. So,
you and me both. I had a Porsche factory driver scheduled to take me around the North Side. So I lost out even bigger than missing the show. I had my whole annual vacation planned around it. So, but hopefully I know what I'm doing in 2021, and those damn Chinese better behave this next year.
All right. No politics. All right. So
it was fact-based observation.
I want to ask everybody, if you will, if you have questions for Lee Scoggins and or myself. This again is Lee Scoggins, president of Next Screen LLC. Those are the guys that own HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. So if you have questions, please, there's a little area in your screen right there to be able to fill in a questions that you can ask. Okay, so we've discussed this a little bit. I just want to make sure, and then I've got a couple of kind of unique questions for you. How does an advertiser work with you? As some of our guests may not know this at all. I know that I've done some stuff through the magazines over the years. And first of all, are manufacturers and the dealers treated the same, differently? How does that work? I guess people are just wondering.
It varies. We empower our salespeople to put packages and offerings together. And so if you look at Taz, we have digital assets and we have print assets. So if you buy an ad in Taz, it may also make sense for you to have a banner ad on our websites. We even have microsites, so it makes sense oftentimes to have a microsite. So they're different packages you put together. They cost money based on coverage. So it's like, if you're a half-page ad, you pay one price. If you're a full page, and that number varies, so I won't throw anything out.
And it also varies by the amount of times that they commit to.
Yeah, absolutely. So to count how many times you're going to be in the magazine. Do you want to be in every other issue, every third issue, or do you want to be in every issue? Speaking of which, your favorite cable brand, AudioQuest, they've had our back page for quite a while now. They've been one of our most loyal customers. So they get a glossy, high visibility part of the magazine to get featured on. That's obviously going to be a different price than. There you go, boom. Looks like the fire series there.
Got to bring my other prop up.
There you go, and you got lids. So that's basically how it works. So you'll commit to so many advertisements over the next, in the period of time varies. You'll tell us whether you want to be in the print advertisement. Again, this is probably a Jim Hannon question, so hopefully okay. Jim's not watching. But
hey Jim.
But, and then we've got banner ads. We have these microsites that we have done in the past for Paradigm and Martin Logan and some other brands. We have email contest. We have contest in HiFi Plus. Recently, we gave away. Again, thanks to AudioQuest for their support, we gave away 3 Cobalt Dragonflies, one of my favorite affordable audio products of all time. And much props to Gordon Rankin, the designer of that thing is outright audio genius. And those things just sound freaking amazing for the
Yep.
money. They're just
Pretty crazy
mind-boggling.
product for the dollar.
And they're tiny and portable. Look, I was a management consultant. I was getting on a Delta plane every week. If you're on a Delta plane every week, buy one of these things, plug your phone into it.
Yep.
Get Tidal, get Cobuzz,
Yep. And don't
and
wait.
you're good to go. You're good to go.
Yes. Don't wait. I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there are things like that we do. We have email newsletters that we send out, and you can get a sponsorship for your email newsletter. I don't know. Does that answer the question? There's sort of a variety of things.
It does.
We are fine tuning our digital offering a little bit. So as the websites get better and we can do more innovative stuff, the types of things we can do on the digital offering side, you'll see improve.
Fantastic. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a question I have wanted to know the answer from you. So what is the toughest review you ever did on a product?
The toughest review I did is I reviewed some very tweaky things from synergistic research. And what made it tough was Ted's, the guy that runs the company, Ted Denny, his stuff works. But the problem is that it uses some quantum physics and some things that are not relatively apparent in terms of what's going on. So all you can do is sit back and have subjective impressions that are very positive. But when people legitimately ask you what's the actual science behind it, there's not an easy answer.
Yeah.
It feels like voodoo. Some of the stuff that Garth's doing with AudioQuest is pretty innovative too.
Yep.
And it's not always the easiest to really get your hands around and arms around what exactly is happening there. And so you can sort of take this, if you're a skeptic or a scientist or a pure objectivist, you could say, well, if I don't know what's going on, I don't know if the wool's being pulled over my eyes. And you can have a very negative view. If you're a subjectivist and you're an audiophile on a journey to get better sound, and you know that it works and you can hear that difference, and then you can put it in your system and hear the difference, who cares?
Yep.
The sound is better. Life is too short. Enjoy it. And don't worry that you can't do a PhD dissertation on it for your physics class final. I don't care. If it sounds good, it is good.
I have always been one of those people that I have to know how it works. And I remember when computers first came along,
Mm-hmm.
and I will tell you that they just completely mystified me. And when I finally gave up having to know how they worked, me and computers started to get along.
Yeah.
Before that, we had a horrible relationship. So
Yeah.
it was it was kind of interesting. So I understand that thought to a big degree. I have had to study a bit of physics myself and just kind of self-teach it and ask questions to all the wonderful people that I get to work with. And even though I don't understand it to a degree that I could manufacture things from a physics standpoint, I had to understand enough to be able to ask questions that I could understand what the philosophy was behind something or another. Even to that degree, I'm a pretty smart guy and a quick study. I don't mind saying there's an awful lot of things in this industry that make a difference that I don't understand. We have a Brinkmann turntable down here that has a tube power supply, and you put that tube power supply on the thing that spins the belt and it sounds better. I don't understand that to the slightest, but there's not a single person you could hook that up in front of from the regular power supply to go to that and be able to say there's not a difference.
I think you need to lend that to me this weekend for study. I'm a little baffled as well. I need some direct experience.
I just bought me a Brinkmann Taurus, which I'm very, very excited about having at home. I've been listening to more records and stuff lately. It's been an amazing experience. Helmet, thank you. And no, he didn't give it to me.
Well, I think it's good. I think it's good to. I think it's, as a reviewer, I think it's good to live with a product for a while. I think once you've lived with it, you have a much deeper understanding of what the pluses and minuses are, and you can talk more intelligently. And that's why a good review, I think, takes time. It's really hard to get a product in and then sort of kick it back out to FedEx in 30 days.
Yep, I agree.
You really need to live with something for 2 or 3 months. I will tell you, had I written a review in day 30, the Wilson Alexias, it would have been a very positive review, but it wouldn't have been the most informed review I could write. When these things get broken in and have 500 hours on them, holy crap, you're hearing a whole world of sound. And it's much easier as a writer when you're very aware of those differences to put that in plain English so the reader can read it and go, wow, I understand. I've got at least some idea what Lee's experiencing at home there.
I think also that when you live with something for a while and then it's taken away, that speaks volumes.
Yeah, and every reviewer's got a piece like this piece got away. I don't know why I sold that.
Well, I know you had a DCS bar talk, and that's, you were talking about one of the companies that's innovative and that kind of thing, and it's just as solid as they can possibly be.
Yeah, I told Jesse Luna and John Quick that it was the hardest day of my life packaging that thing up and dropping it off at the UPS mailbox store. I was not excited. Actually, what I did was I think we FedEx that to the last Rocky Mountain because I think David Solomon, our good friend David Solomon, used that for some Cobuzz demonstrations in their little CanJam headphone area.
Great company. So what are some of your favorite products right now?
I'd have to say the Bartok, and to the extent that if in a couple of years, if I were to buy a DAC, I'd really try to actually get his bigger brother, the Rossini, because the Rossini V2 is just. I heard they had that at Munich with some Wilson Sasha DAWs, and it was just lifelike in sound. And there have been a few times I've heard digital actually sound that good. I'm obviously a big fan of the Wilson lineup. I'm a big fan of the Alexia 2s. I'd have to say for the money, though, the DAWs are pretty special. I'd say that might be one of the key points in the entire product lineup that Wilson has, where I think if you got a DAW, you'd be getting a really good amount of that Wilson engineering and sound quality and the state of the art of where that is for not small money, but not crazy money either. I think that's a pretty special product. I'm a big audio research fan. In fact, I won't review audio research stuff because I'm biased, because I run a Fans of Audio Research Facebook page, as you may know.
Probably wouldn't be right.
But I'd have to say I'm pretty impressed with both the Ref 160 monos and the Ref 160 stereo.
Yeah, we've got the monos here, and they're just
those things. Again, that's another product you need to drop off at my house tonight so I can evaluate with the Alexias. Actually, I heard that combination at the Exponent show. One of the dealers had that and it was mind-boggling. Plus, you get all the bells and whistles of those ghost meters, which is pretty.
We've got the Ref 3 Phono and the Ref 6 SE, and then the 160 mono is actually hooked up to the 7s and the 9 subwoofers from Vandersteen, and it's a pretty magical little sound. So I love what's going on in there.
I would also say, Alan, that I'd be remiss as a former headphone guru writer not to mention some headphone lines I continue to be impressed with. And I know you carry these guys. I'm not trying to be biased in that way at all, but I really do like the Odyssey line a lot. Yep. The stuff that Sankar's doing there and out near Newport area is just really cool. And the Grado line. There's something about the purity and the clarity of the mid-range and the Grado headphones that I just really like. And then we had mentioned the Cord Hugo 2. The Cord products are pretty special. I'd love to have a Dave on my desk in the home office as sort of my headphone station. But I think if I get, that's kind of tough because you couldn't do the DCS and the Dave without like winning the lottery. So I'd probably do the DCS for the main system, but maybe at some point I'm a Hugo 2 customer for you.
Well, at some point you might just say, welcome home, Dave.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. All right. All right. So actually, you already answered that question. So anyway, let me move on to the next one. How does the magazine intend basically on engaging with dealers? I know that you talked a little bit about that, and I don't know if you have anything that you can share that way. But anyway, I just wonder if there was, kind of what the magazine sees as its, future in that regard. I know that's one of the things. You and I had lunch one day, and we were talking about, that it was kind of one of the things that your magazine was looking at, is trying to engage with the dealers as well.
Yeah, let me tease you with some insights. So there's something coming up on that directly answer that. I'm not sure I want to talk about it quite yet.
Okay, you don't need to.
Alan, I think
I'm
I
not
hinted.
pushing.
I think I hinted to you what's coming down the road. But I will say this: if you pick up an issue of HiFi Plus, out of 11 or 12 issues or so a year, around roughly 8 of them, and you flip to the back of the magazine, they've got a neat little feature called Meet Your Dealer. Now, these tend to be UK and European dealers, but we actually go and introduce the readers of our HiFi Plus magazine to those dealers with a 1-page or 2-page profile. And that's really interesting to us because the dealers get a lot out of it. The people in London may not be aware of all the HiFi dealers that are, sprinkled out among the countryside of
Right.
England or the close to their town. And just connecting those customers with the dealer, that's sort of an important function. We know these dealers. We sometimes get product to try and review from them. We know the manufacturers that tell us about these dealers, and we're trying, for us, at the end of the day, we are a business, and
Yes.
we are trying to promote brands and then sell advertising based on helping the dealers get the word out. But usually your connection as a customer is going to be like, it's sort of like you, Alan. It's like the person living in Alpharetta, Roswell, Buckhead, Snellville, their local dealer is HiFi Buys. And knowing what brands HiFi Buys carries and knowing about the history of the name of HiFi Buys, it creates well, first of all, really interesting story, particularly in your case.
Right.
And it just creates that first connection. And if Absolute Sound and HiFi Plus can play a big role in getting more people to walk through your door and experience, at that point, it's up to you. You got to take over. You got to give them a great experience.
Right.
And then everybody benefits. But I know you well enough, and I've been in your store, and I've been a customer. I've gotten that experience. I know that happens there. But to the extent that we can do that on a global scale and connect customers with dealers, I think that will be very beneficial to the industry. It's a little bit of a trade effect, but the other thing that we can do potentially is we can also compile some information. Our editor Robert Harley writes a book that's a guide to high-end audio. That's one of the classic books.
Right.
We can put together articles that talk about how to work with your dealer and some fundamentals of how you set up a system. So we're going to arm we can also arm that customer coming into the doorway of HiFi Buys, and they're working with you or Ed Scruggs or David or Chris or Mike, whoever. If we can make them a little bit more knowledgeable and get them some of the basics, maybe that makes your life a little bit easier too, because you're dealing with a little bit of a partially educated customer, and you can kind of get them to the next level. And you can actually sit them down in one of those nice leather seats you have, or those sofas you have, or the fancy room with the crazy audio research stuff I dream about at night on the HRS stand, and the time aligned and phase aligned and whatever, System 9, Vandy's. And then from there on, you sort of got them.
I think one of the big things we run into, and I think it's funny that, you mentioned that to arm them a little bit more. And I think the internet does kind of such a confusing job for people with that these days.
Oh, gosh.
And so most of the folks that come in and say, I know enough now to be dangerous. And I find that kind of interesting, and I don't disagree with it. But at the same time, we as a store believe in educating. Because in reality, all of us have friends that have spent stupid money on something we don't know anything about. And because we don't know anything about it, we can't see the value in it. And so until people know and can understand and can see things, but, listening is learned. It's not like you just have this gift of these special ears. Listening is learned. It's something that you become better at in time, and the better systems you listen to, the better your ears become.
Yeah, and like those events that you do with the industry people that you have come in and do like the 1 and 2 night things, you started that at Audio Alternative, and I used to, even when it was inconvenient, I would get my butt down to Indian Trail Road, because you would get Richard Vanderstein, and I'd learn more listening in an hour. Now, sometimes I get frustrated because it'd be really long and I want to hear damn speakers. I've been very honest and open with you about it, but to hear Richard talk and explain how he builds speakers and the basic principles behind that for an hour and a half, you're getting like 30 or 40 years of distilled in direct experience, distilled in plain English that you can understand as an audiophile. And I might even say, now I hope you go to Allen's store and buy Vandersteen's and everybody wins. But even if you don't, the knowledge you get from going to those events is helpful in you doing a better job of selecting whatever speaker you wind up with. You might buy ELACs, you might buy, whatever it is. You're going to benefit from hearing an icon and a very knowledgeable designer like Richard talk about how he does the business and why he chose, the carbon fiber stuff he did for the drivers, and how the timing and phase stuff works. That was incredibly valuable to me. Even the NAD guys coming in and talking a little bit about how they're doing some of their new products. All that stuff adds up. If you go to those events over time, you're just smarter and smarter, and you're making better and better decisions.
Yep. And I always tell everybody, something I've always done since I walked into a store 37 years ago and worked for the store 2 days later, is don't be afraid to ask questions. You end up finding that having a two-way conversation with someone that knows what they're doing and that kind of thing is very, very beneficial. I do caution you, nothing wrong with asking questions out on the internet, but understand that everything that you will ask will either be agreed upon or not agreed upon, and you'll have both sides of that to look at. And I think that's also very good. But I think you'll find there's some very, very knowledgeable people out there that you can talk to. We have a store full of them here. And I know that there's other stores around the country with some very knowledgeable folks as well. And so anyway, just a good idea to not stop asking questions. I have been doing this again for 37 years and I ask questions every day. So I tell everybody I'm not a know-it-all, but I've been around the block once, twice, maybe 3 times.
Well, yeah. And there's so many different moving parts and complexities to audio. I'm certainly not an expert. I'm knowledgeable on some topics, but if it came to computer streaming, and you put Chris and me in a room together, you wouldn't want to take any advice on me from streaming. That would be a Chris Doty question for sure. Because there's a specialized knowledge there, and it's almost part information technology kind of stuff. Yep. And the experience of putting together streaming systems and setting up servers and stuff like Chris is really good at. Yet nobody knows everything. Yep. That's one thing I've also learned. That's
why I let Chris learn that, and I work on the other end. So
yeah,
because this business has gotten, when you think about, in the 80s or whatever, we were pretty much mostly analog, just starting to convert to some digital. And gosh, we didn't have Ethernet and all that other stuff and digital signatures and all kinds of coding that had to link up to make something work and so on. And so it definitely, as we experienced in the very beginning of this HiFi chats, technology sometimes can get in our way.
Yeah, and some of it's not readily apparent what's going on. Again, going back to my earlier example, I wound up buying some diamond Ethernet cable. And I use it to connect my AT&T Uverse router to my Samsung television, which is crazy. It's like my little beer budget. I've spent so much on my speakers, as you know. I don't have the money to have a proper home theater, but that little Ethernet cable going into the TV and the better bandwidth characteristics. And I started with a cheaper AudioQuest Ethernet cable, which is also really, really good. But when I moved to Diamond, I got more silver, and I don't know what that did, but the picture quality got better.
Yep. Now
I don't know why that is, but it works. Now, whether you want to spend that much on an Ethernet cable or not is up to you. But it's weird stuff like that in our hobby that does actually bring the performance. And until you have direct experience, you may not understand what's going on, or you may not believe that there would be that difference. But once you get that experience, you don't really want to go back. You don't want to go to a poor picture quality if you think you're seeing the best you can see.
Correct. And if you didn't have interest in trying to get a better picture quality, you wouldn't have tried it. So
right. And a lot of these digital cables, they sort of act like analog devices at the end of the day. So some of the stuff there's actually some real science behind it as well, of course. But sometimes it's just not readily apparent based on what the average person's knowledge of science is.
I always tell everybody we follow the rules of physics, and they're not called hopeful thoughts and wishes for a reason. They're called laws. So,
But I also think that, like, at the end of the day, if you put together a system and you've done it thoughtfully and intelligently, and you've had good advice from your local dealer, and you've got some good sound that you're happy with, if another member of the local audiophile club comes over and they don't like it,
who
that's
cares?
okay.
Yep.
It doesn't matter. All that matters, like, if people, I want people to hear my system go, oh wow, that's really cool. That's more of an ego thing. As long as at the end of the day I'm happy with what I'm hearing, I don't care. I really don't care. And I
Yep.
think a lot of people take this hobby a little too seriously. It's not.
Really?
It's I know, right? It's not a competition. This is supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to drive enjoyment.
Supposed to be fun.
It's supposed to be fun. It's not like, oh, did you hear so and so got better speakers than you? You got to go buy. And there's this funny thing that I started hearing about 6 months ago, and that is, if you talk to an audiophile and you didn't spend enough, if your friend who's an audiophile, if you didn't spend as much money as their speakers cost, you didn't spend enough. And if your speakers cost more than your audiophile friend's speakers, then you spent too much on your speakers. There's a lot of that in the hobby, and it's just a lot of nonsense.
Yep, it is.
Oh, David Solomon's got some great stories and sayings around this. He's one of the greats out there too. He and Ken Forsyth both have been mentors as well.
They're great folks.
And digital in general, and of course the great Bob Stewart on the MQA front. And they're just like, they know that it's about having fun. And I think some people get a little too wrapped up in the technology, get a little too wrapped up and become gearheads, which is fine. I don't want to take that away from them. It does sell product for the industry, so that's maybe good too.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, if you're not enjoying the music, I don't know. You're like in a different hobby than the one I want to be in.
Yep. Well, I tell people, listen, I don't care whether you do digital or analog or Cobuzz or Tidal or
reel to reel
or 8-track or reel to reel or whatever. If you love your system, just love it. And I remember that my first system that I had was it was the buy out of the back of the van ripoff out of California, where they drive
the white van speakers.
Hey, we just got 3 extra pairs, and they had a little sheet. They had a little sheet
coincidence.
Of paper.
It happened every summer too. Some of them done. Somebody gets a really sloppy supply chains.
They had a sheet of paper that could show you that they were worth like $8.99 or whatever. Now with the internet, they can show you a website with reviews, and I mean, gosh, the credibility just goes way up. And anyway, I had that and a little 40 watt per channel slide volume Pioneer receiver. And I love that system as much as I love the system that I had today. And I have loved every step of going from where I was to where I am. And all of it's been educational. I had no idea when I was buying so much gear and trading it in and out of my house that I would wind up where I am today. But I knew something was special going on. And anyway, it was a ton of fun.
Well, Alan, I've had a couple lucky things happen to me. This job offer from Tom, falling into sort of a role at Chesky, a part-time role at Chesky Records. Running into and meeting Scott and getting some great experience working for him at part-time audiophile. I've had a couple of lucky things that happen along the way, but I do believe that if you're really enthusiastic and passionate about a subject, this stuff tends to happen, and you just got to capitalize on it. But yeah, if you would have told me where I would be working and the fun I'd be having working at Next Screen and working with some of these guys I've been reading since the 80s, like Robert Harley and, it just would blow my mind. I'd be like, no way, that's not going to happen.
I'm going to agree with every single bit of that, because I wouldn't be HiFi Buys here today without that.
Yeah, your whole story with Mel and everything, and how you got the brand rejuvenated. And
I mean, Mel has just been a good friend and mentor for me. And so anyway, Mel's been a pretty special guy.
He's a heck of a nice guy. He's always been very nice to me. He's a heck of a nice guy, and what a great businessman, and what a brand he built.
Yep. Well, it was one of his folks that he sold the company to, Jeffrey Snow, that really built it into the monster, and that HiFi Buys was, and he deserves a lot of the credit for going there. Actually,
absolutely,
a good piece of that. But Mel and his wife Sally are just anyway, just great people. I love them to death.
All right, I love it when they show up for your events.
I do too.
I love it when they show up.
I do too. So I have one more question for you, and then we're going to go into Q&A, guys. So what is your favorite audio show you attend?
Hands down, Rocky Mountain Audio Fest.
Okay, awesome.
The Florida show was awesome this year, so I give props to Mike Bovaird and Bart and the team there. However, Marjorie at the Rocky Mountain Audio Fest and the Colorado Audio Society, what a great show that was. I grew up on that show. I think I went the first or second year, and I went to every show thereafter except for one show I had to miss because of pressing work engagements. But I got to know most of the people in the industry.
I have always wanted to go, but never been. I've always been too busy here. So anyway, we're going to get into some Q&A. Lee, thank you so much. I just want to ask everybody to like and subscribe out there. You end up finding it, if you will, go to hifibuys.com and sign up for our newsletter so you can see about what's coming up in the future. We are officially now open Monday through Friday from 11 to 4. And be on the phones pretty much the rest of the time. The actual hours are 9 in the morning till 7 during those same days, Monday through Saturday. We do have a HiFi Buys e-commerce platform that actually is going to go live in about 10 days, 2 weeks. And you end up finding we're really excited about doing that. And we hope that, well, we don't hope, we know that's going to be a success for us. So we're excited about it. Also, next week, we're going to turn this thing upside down and actually have Chris Doty interview me. There were some folks in the HiFi chats that had asked for that. So that's why that's happening. So I haven't seen the question list yet. So anyway, if y'all have questions, please ask a question out there. We're going to go ahead and get started with our first question. Are you ready to go, Lee?
I think so.
All right, well, we'll see.
I hope my friend Jimmy out there isn't going to ask me some super difficult question.
Jimmy W?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we'll see there. All right, this is from Minsu P. Hey, Minsu, do you have a list of songs that you use to evaluate audio gear?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies so much, it's hard to tell. I will tell you that there are some good bass tracks like Limbo from Yellow's Toy album. I'm a big Yellow fan.
Okay.
I grew up in, oh yeah, there were a lot of Yellow songs back in the old days of Miami Vice. And I was at the age where that made a big impression on me between the cheese grater Ferraris and the cigarette boats. And I love the soundtrack. And so that's how I initially discovered Yellow. And of course, it was in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the Oh Yeah song, which they're famous. But Limbo, their Toy album, is extremely well recorded. They have remastered it, I think, and I think that's the version I listen to on Rune. I'm a big Rune fan, and I use that to evaluate DACs a lot. I like a lot of acoustic music as well, so I listen to Blue Note Jazz. But one track, I also like the Mobile Fidelity did an SACD on Keb Mo, and I think it might be a self-titled album because I can't remember the title. It might be self-titled, but there's some really well-recorded acoustic songs on that album. I'll use that. There are a variety of classical albums I use, like Love for Three Oranges, and I've got some records for that. For speakers, there are a couple of Analog Productions 45 sets, most notably the Dean Martin Dream with Dean. There's so much presence on that, you can almost smell the gin on his voice while he's singing. Wow. It's sort of a slow album in some ways, but it's great for evaluating the purity and the clarity of a system. But all these things vary. I do have some go-tos. Probably the most fun one I do, and I do it pretty consistently, and that is the Robert Ludwig pressing of DeGuayo by ZZ Top. If you've ever heard a clean Robert Ludwig pressing of that 80s classic DeGuayo, it's just, I mean, if you like that kind of music, it just doesn't get any better. I played the shit out of that. I've actually found a second Ludwig pressing that I'm keeping for when I finally wear out the grooves of the one I have. That's really a lot of fun, and people enjoy that when I do the demo. I have some Hendrix test pressings currently in the house that I've been playing for people. It's the test pressing that Analog Productions did, both mono and stereo. So there's a producer I know, Bill Levinson, who has graciously lent those to me to try, and they usually impress the people that I have over. And he's done some work for the Allman Brothers. and the Allman Brothers recording that he has is spectacular. So that I could go on and on, but it varies. But those are a couple of favorites.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And you guys will get those on the Hi-Fi Buys playlist. And so thank you, Minsu. Great question. And great stuff. I'm somewhat familiar, except they're test pressings. I don't have those. You know.
Well, yeah.
So our next question is from James R. Hey, James. It seems that Absolute Sound does not cover the international scene very much and not in much detail. Can you comment on this? Waiting for my Kuzma turntable reviews, for example. Maybe I missed them.
Yeah. That's another great question. So on the international scene, we're trying to beef up coverage there. But a lot of that we actually cover in HiFi Plus. So we actually use the geographical location of our team. Alan Sercom, our editors in the London area. Pete Trewin is in the Salisbury, UK, where our offices are there. So we use HiFi Plus mostly to cover the European scene. But I will agree that there are some interesting things happen in Asia Pacific too, and we've actually internally been exploring ways that we can sort of start to make some inroads into Asia Pacific. So stay tuned. We've got a couple of good ideas. It may take a while, but we do have a global reach though, but we are always building it. On the Absolute Sound, we do cover a fair number of international brands, but maybe that's something that Robert and I can talk about and sort of brainstorm a little bit about how we can improve that.
Well, the one thing you want to make sure is you have, if you are going to review them and it's going to be here, that they have to have good distribution here.
Absolutely.
That's one of the most important things. So,
absolutely.
James, a great question. Thank you. And thank you for your answer, Lee. So Rubiera 58 has a question, and I love this question. What do you look for in a retail store? In the 90s in New York, I found Lyric and other stores to be intimidating.
They definitely were in the 90s because I was living there in the 90s in the West Village, and they were a little intimidating. I like friendly stores. I like people that really are focused on your well-being as a customer. I hate the old school snobby specialty retailer. I think they should go the way of the dodo bird. I think in New York, it's a little tricky because it's a little bit part of the local flavor, if you will, and local culture. But I think some of those stores, even now, I'll call out the store In Living Stereo that's in the East Village. I had a couple of trips there, and that was very friendly. He's using some more obscure brands like Shindo Electronics. But there are great exceptions even in New York where you can go to find a friendly store. And I think even Lyric's gotten more friendly over time. Lenny there gave a brilliant tour of some of their Wilson products last time I was there with a local friend named Michael here. But anyway, I think that's a very good question because I think we have to make it's a luxury experience. You're buying, at a lot of the levels of our hobby, a luxury product. You should get that full customer experience. You should be welcome. You should just be treated, like a good customer, whether it's your first time in the store or the 100th time in the store. I think, Alan's an example where that works. So I think that's a good question. I do not like the intimidating stores. I don't think that helps anybody at the end of the day. I don't think manufacturers like it either, based on my conversations with owners a lot of these companies. I think they want their dealers to offer really good service.
Yep, it's where long-term relationships are made.
Yeah, you have to have a certain level of trust. You're not going to trust if someone calls you up and they say, "Hey, Lee, I know you bought the Mark II from me 5 years ago, and I wouldn't do this, but the Mark III has come out and it's so much better. I think you at least owe it to yourself to come down here. Why don't we just find a time and you can come down and listen?" And a lot of some audiophiles just don't like that, but most audiophiles are always trying to improve things and upgrade their system, and they want to hear the Mark III in this example, or whatever mark it is, or the Mark II over the Mark I, whatever it is, there's no harm, no foul to coming down and having a good listen. And if you think it's worthwhile, then maybe there's some deal to be made. Maybe there's a trade-in value and you get the Mark III, you get some trade-in on your Mark II to apply to that purchase, and you wind up with better sounding gear at the end of the day. The dealer's happy because they've sold something. But yeah, I think that's kind of how audiophiles operate. I'm at a pretty good level of sound, I have to say, at home. But I have a Ref 5 SE line stage from Audio Research, which is a great product.
Yep.
But Audio Research just came out with the Ref 6 special edition. Would I prefer to have that in there? Absolutely.
All right. I think that's a really great question and a great answer by you. I'm going to speak up for HiFi Buys on its own. If you go to our website and you ever walk in this store and you ever feel intimidated, I would be absolutely shocked. we are about as easy to come in store and about as unintimidating as it can be. Sometimes the gear itself can be a little intimidating, and I understand that, but we start from Sonos and go to the moon. So wherever you want to be, we'd love to help. So
well, I have to do a little bit of a shout out. I'm not a totally unbiased observer here, but Ed Scruggs and David, they're just some of the nicest people you meet in the industry. So just as a customer and a frequent visitor to the store, I would echo that as a more objective party than Alan himself.
I'm a little higher energy than they. So anyway, thank you very much. Again, appreciate that question. So also from Riviera 58, what are your thoughts or feelings on crowdfunding or some manufacturers moving to a consumer direct model, in parentheses, like PS Audio?
That's a difficult question because I can point to a couple of positives and a couple of negatives, one of which I was kind of inadvertently involved in. When I first started writing, there was a company called LH Labs that had done some crowdfunding, and this goes back 6-7 years, and for a number of their products, people are still waiting on product, and that's the downside of some of these crowdfundings. If you work with a less established company, you may not get your product. Now, that's never going to be an issue with PS Audio. I know Paul and Scott there, they just have a first-class team. They ship product. That's not a problem with them. So here's my answer. This is a difficult question because
Good question.
I think if you don't go through a dealer, you're going to miss out on a lot of that experience. So my druthers would be that you use a dealer instead. If it's a pretty straightforward product, because they're not paying, if you will, that margin to the dealer, the cost of some of the equipment from a company like PS Audio is going to be less expensive, and you'll still get good sound quality. But I think if you're a young audiophile and you're just starting out in this community, you can't really underestimate the value of a dealer, and you're much better off going to the dealer. If something breaks, sometimes dealing with everything on a mail order basis is a lot trickier too. So you have to think about the total experience, not just buying and selecting the product and having the advice and people like Alan and Ed and David sort of demystify and put into plain English how to view different, some of the complicated features and what you really need and what you don't really need, and have some experience behind their advice. But you also need to think, what happens if that product breaks? How quickly are you going to get it fixed? If you have a second sound system that you can listen to in the meantime, that's one thing. But if your system is down because you had to send that product back to the factory, that's something to consider. A dealer can sometimes lend out stuff and keep you listening to music. They can sort of manage that. They've got that dealer manufacturer relationship, so they can help make sure service gets done properly and efficiently. So I to be honest, I'm a big fan of PS Audio. I actually have their direct stream DAC stack, the memory player, and but I have mixed feelings. There are some downsides to the crowdfunding model. So just be careful if you do send in money. You're dealing with established people that are going to send you a product back in return for it. So if you're on, like, Drop's pretty safe, you know, they've got products. But if you're on Indiegogo or, you know, any of these sites, Kickstarter, there are some real risk in terms of whether you receive the product or not. So I wouldn't buy anything real expensive there. And then in terms of consumer direct, there's some price advantages, but again, I think, to echo what Alan and I have been talking about, the dealer is really a key part of that equation.
So I want to, I guess, chime in one thing there. Great question and good answer. And it is a, you know, a difficult thing because there are sides to all of it. So we're getting ready to do e-commerce. So, you know, the thoughts are, if we go direct, and even though we're not direct, we're buying it from other, does that have a cost? Well, absolutely. And what you end up finding is the cost is actually comparable to what my rent and space and other costs are, fixed costs that I have. So even if I'm going direct, I have a very similar cost to even if I'm not. So even if you're a manufacturer, all that stuff is not passed along and everybody saves like 80% or something. And that's kind of the general rule or thought that's in the mind out there, that I'm making so much money hand over foot that if they can drop me, you win in all these ways. Well, we've seen that happen with people that were direct and then wanted a dealer base afterwards, and yet the prices didn't change. So just something for you to consider as thought. Okay, I very much love the interaction, the relationships that you build. I think those are the most important things that we can do, and that has been proven through this time, as Atlanta has been very kind to us, and I have no words to how to say thanks for that. So, but anyway, great question, and that could be debated on the internet, I'm sure, in what, 1 million pages of answers. So this other is not a question, but this is from Matt O. Hey, Matt. But Lee, thank you so much for improving, and so in big capital letters, for improving the digital experience for the Absolute Sound on iPad. So.
Oh, thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. I have to give a lot of credit to Garrett Witten, who's our sort of in-house technology guy and keeper of websites, et cetera. And Jim Hannon for working real closely with him to get stuff done. And also some credit to a company called Blue Toad, which helped program the app. They're a third-party software developer, and they just do fantastic work. I've been reading a lot of it and trying to test it and trying to get it to fail on my own personal iPad. I'm probably going to get a new iPad to sort of see how it works on current Apple. But if it runs on my increasingly slow, you know how Apple products are, 4 years and you're sort of out of date completely. If it's running on my 4 to 5 year old iPad as well as it does and loading pages quick, I think they've done the job. The one other thing is there has been a little bit of a transition where we moved from the old app to the new app. We do have and we're about to publish it on our Facebook page for the Absolute Sound, but we do have a much better customer service experience, which has been, to be kind, subpar in the past. And we have fixed that process and actually have a third party that's actually very good. And as people transition to the new app, the technical problems we had from the prior version, we're just not getting, like, our customer complaints are down like 90%, is my understanding.
Boy, that must be comforting.
Well, it really is. We didn't do it at the level of the other stuff that we do. If you look at the quality of and Alan, I'll soon give you again the electronics book spare that I have, but if you look at the quality of our publications and our coffee table books about the history of the business, I think I could make a good argument they're very high quality. We just weren't there on some of our digital assets, and part of my job is to fix that, and we're fixing them, and that's the good news.
Obviously, it's being seen, so that's awesome. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. And so Jimmy W.
Oh, geez.
With all the different / various pressings of LPs, is there a quick resource on how can one make sure he gets a good album / disc?
Yes, that's a great question.
It is.
So Jonathan Vallon, our editor extraordinaire, who has heard almost every album in existence, I think. Now I'm dating Jonathan, so they'll be held to pay for that. But he has come up with a super disc list, which, if you're a longtime reader of the magazine, know that Harry Pearson originally built. And to be on that list, the sound quality has to be really, really high. And if you're a special mention on that list, it has to be among the best albums. So if you go to that super disc list, you will find a list of classical, pop, and jazz albums that have been vetted, typically by several of our writers, and then overseen by the great Jonathan Vallen, one of our best writers and sort of icon in the industry, and also a noted classical expert. He's the guy that wrote the RCA Living Stereo Bible. That list is sort of it's our reference list of the best recordings. So Jimmy, I think if you look for that, I can send you a copy of that actually, but it's I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I don't remember exactly what number issue it was in, but it was just, I think the update was just a few months ago, 2 or 3 months ago.
Yep.
And
Lee,
it's really good. You won't find a bad record on that list. Now, what may happen, unfortunately, is because some of these pressings are limited quantities. You may find an album you want, and it may be out of print, and you have to go to eBay and pay exorbitant prices to get a copy. But keep haunting your local record stores. Some of this stuff eventually comes up, and sometimes, like some of these classic records pressings that were really good. Chad Kassem, who's another great friend of mine at Acoustic Sounds, he'll eventually get his company Analog Productions, at least on a lot of this stuff, to repress that album, and he usually does it at a higher level than even Classic did, which was pretty high because you had the great Bernie Grundman do the mastering. Yep. So a lot of this stuff comes back around. You may have to wait 5 or 10 or 15 years, but eventually it comes around, and usually the latest version, they keep making the mastering chain better. So the sound just keeps going higher and higher and higher.
Awesome. Jimmy, thanks for the question. And appreciate the contribution. I'd love a copy of that too, if you're going to get one to Jimmy. So I know I've got the magazine.
Oh, for you, it'll cost a DCS bar talk.
Okay, fair enough. and a pair of monoblock amps for the weekend. I got you.
Yeah.
Got it covered. All right. Yeah. Our last, let's see, actually, I believe we have shared the link in the chat for that. So anyway, that'll be great. Thank you, Chris. Last question, again, Riviera 58, thank you again. I own both volumes of the History of High-End Audio books. Want to tease when the third volume on source components will come out?
This is something I've been working on. Great question. So here's the short answer. We don't know yet. We're in discussions with the writers. It is, as you can imagine, if you have the first 2 volumes, a tremendous effort. At the same time, we're dealing with, cost, a few cost reductions across the board to sort of keep us putting out great issues, in the age of coronavirus. But there are a number of senior people at the company very much in favor of bringing out volume 3. We actually sell a good number of those books. It's not a huge, but it's a nice tidy revenue stream for us. And there's a lot to be talked about. I mean, it's just rich history. If you look at DCS and how their company was connected to the defense business, if you look at the analog history of VPI, there's some great stories that need to be told. And if I have anything to do with it, and if I have to bribe, cajole, or fly out to Albuquerque and take Robert to a fancy restaurant, and then fly out to Cincinnati and take Jonathan Vallen out to a fancy restaurant, I will do whatever I can to make sure the volume 3 comes out, because I feel like I've only got 2/3 of the collection, and we need to bring out volume 3. So there you have it.
That sounds like an interesting thing. It is amazing, some of the history behind some of these companies. And, that is always kind of, I don't know, it's like I was talking to Richard yesterday about him, putting a lawnmower motor on his bicycle at 7 or 8 years of age and getting arrested for going down a road that he wasn't supposed to be on. And anyway, that was really neat. So anyway, that is all with the questions. And just want to thank everybody for asking questions, and also thank Lee Scoggins, who is president of Next Screen LLC, owners of HiFi Plus and the Absolute Sound. Lee, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Alan. It's a real honor to speak, and hopefully I cleared up some of the misconceptions and I have given the viewer some flavor about how the business works.
I think that's awesome. I thought this was great insight, and I really appreciate you coming on. And I know you didn't get a long time to look at any of the questions, so I kind of hit you blindsided a little bit, and appreciate your tolerance of me.
Yeah, no problem.
My turn will be next week as they flip this thing upside down, and shall we say, my general manager Chris Doty will be interviewing me, and I'm looking forward to that. Kinda. I don't have my question list. But listen, this has been Hi-Fi Chats number 8 with Alan Jones and Lee Scoggins. Again, Hi-Fi Bites, thanks you for tuning in. Y'all be well.
Thanks.
Thank you. Stay with me.